We do have a lot to cover, so I'm really going to try to keep it moving. I wanted to address throughout the presentation, I'll be using different terms: Native American, American Indian, Indigenous, and I just wanted to address those differences in those labels. As you know, a lot of those labels were not given by tribal folks. Those were labels, terms that the government came up with. And so throughout my career, many people have asked, what's the right term to use? And, mostly because people don't want to be offensive. I myself grew up using the term Indian because that was what the government called us, and that was what my mom said, and still to this day she does, as well as elders in our community, just in normal conversation, still just use the term Indian, although that is not politically correct as far as, outside, I would say, the communities. And then when I graduated, I became a professional, and then the term I had to use was Native American because that was politically correct, and that was a hard transition for me because I had been calling myself and my family and, most indigenous people Indians, and so I made that transition as I became a professional, and now it seems it's changed a little bit again, and when you're writing for federal grants and different things like that, some of the terminology uses American Indian. Again, none of these terms were given by the people who they are calling, and so a lot of indigenous people, when I say indigenous, I mean the first people who were inhabitants of the land, and so indigenous is a very wide term used for all over the world. There's indigenous people in the Americas, Canada, Australia, and so that's a very broad term. Of course, when we talk about Native American and American Indian, we're talking specifically about the indigenous people of America. And so, again, I just wanted to address those different labels. A lot of indigenous folks want to be called, or they refer to themselves as the original traditional name of their tribe that was generated by their people. But if I introduce myself or talk about the Kuakashawayate, nobody knows what that means. So, then I usually revert to Lower Sioux, and then a lot of people attach to that word Sioux, which again is not a name that was given, that we used as a tribal people. It was given to us by our enemies historically. And so, there is no federally recognized tribe named Sioux. And so usually when that happens, I try to take a brief moment to educate people, but again, these different labels and terms are out there. If you want to know what a particular person, if you don't want to be offensive, if you have a relationship with an indigenous person, you can sure ask them. Sometimes they will say, when in their introduction, they will acknowledge their tribal descendancy or heritage or ancestry, and then you can have a good idea of the terminology they use. But I did want to address the different terms before I started. Why do we need training on American Indian culture, our American Indian students, and our tribal colleges and university? We're going to live near tribal communities, partner and work with and within our tribal communities, teach American Indian students, and interact with indigenous people of this land. We really need to know about their history and culture. Don't you agree? We have, unfortunately, our education system, K through 12, and even at the higher education level, we really don't have a good curriculum and basis of passing along this rich and valuable history. And so, we have to take it upon ourselves to educate ourselves. And I would like to say, a lot of the times what is in textbooks and different modalities of learning is distorted, possibly inaccurate. And so again, we have to do our due diligence when we're talking about our, again, American Indian history. Another thing is that a lot of times people separate out American Indian history. We have our American history And then we have our American Indian history, and that there is no such thing as that. We have our history. We have the pre-colonial history, of course, of American Indians, but our American history includes our American indigenous history of this land, and a lot of the times it's been deleted, it's been omitted, and that is another form of racial discrimination when we eliminate a whole culture, especially some of people that were indigenous to this land. We eliminate them from our history. I mean, again, there's a lot of different states and political legislation that's trying to reclaim that, but unfortunately, South Dakota is not there yet. And so again, we have to take it upon ourselves. A lot of the information that people do know or is passed down or is communicated is not accurate. We have a lot of misinformation out there regarding Native Americans specifically and our tribal communities, not just in South Dakota, but across America. We will all encounter a more diverse student body and diverse country. Again, we need to do our due diligence to know about these different backgrounds and cultures and history. They bring value. They bring value to our country as a whole, in our education systems, and we need to learn about them. We can't change any beliefs or attitudes or behaviors without being informed. Again, being able to address maybe some of those misinformation or historical fallacies or just blatant lies, actually. We need to be educated, and so I'm glad, again, that there's so many people here today. That just speaks to all of you and your pursuit of learning more. As some of you probably know, our history with our tribal communities and our indigenous peoples has not been good. It includes genocide, stealing of homelands, betrayal, forced colonial practices through education, and many other practices. All of these have been extremely horrific and have consequences not only throughout history, but today. These consequences continue to impact our tribal communities and our tribal people through historical trauma. Again, historical trauma is not unique to American Indians because there's been a lot of different minority populations that have had things happen or just on an individual basis. But again, with the history of our American Indian indigenous population, again, across not only America, but our world, there's been a long legacy. There's just a quote there: an understanding of Native American history is necessary precursor to understanding the current context of Native American students in post-secondary education. Again, we have the different eras broken up there. And of course, pre-colonial contact, there was estimated 50 to 100 million indigenous people living in America. And again, these were very complex civilizations with their own culture, language, government, and religious practices. A lot of in history, we hear the term uncivilized or savages, and that just really isn't true. But again, that's one of those distortions that continues to perpetuate. Again, the different eras, the colonial period, the U.S. government started to engage in treaties with our native nations, which then established tribal sovereignty, which I'll talk about in just a minute, creation of reservations, and then different treaties that continued to remove more and more land, which really affected the culture of American Indian people. Allotment and assimilation, again, where Native American land on reservations was sold to white settlers. So even within the protected reservation boundaries, a lot of those different areas then were sold off. Later, they had laws made that stopped that practice, but there's still a lot of families historically that got their land, farming land and whatnot, that is on reservation lands from that historical context. And the assimilation period, which again was tried, I would in every single era, trying to assimilate Native Americans to the European culture, taking them off of reservations, giving them incentives to move off reservations, and then of course the trauma of the boarding schools, where over half of the children were removed, and a third of those children died in boarding schools, destroying language, culture, and our family structure. The experience at the boarding schools, they did not have any idea of parenting because they were raised away from their parent and their traditional culture, and what they experienced there was violence. And you can see some of that violence continue to perpetuate into our tribal communities today. That's not cultural. That is a direct result of the violence of the boarding schools. Again, that historical trauma. The termination period where the United States government decided to do away with reservations, or that was their idea, again, that didn't work. And then from 1968 to present day, finally we have the self-determination period where, again, we had to fight for our tribal sovereignty. Everything that we had to do, we had to go to court for and fight for. When you look at the history, really that last era that we're in right now, that has been the most positive when we can take control back of our lands, of our systems, and do what's best for the people in each of the tribal communities. What do we learn from this history? And really the takeaway is attempts to force American Indians to assimilate does not work. Some of these attempts were very well intended, for our own good, but year after year, era after era, history has proved assimilation doesn't work, and not only doesn't it not work, it's extremely destructive, and that legacy, again, continues to affect our tribal communities to this day, our culture, religion, language, our identity, and then again trying to reclaim our own history and culture and way of life through self-determination. That's been the only thing that has shown to be positive. And so why would we continue to do something that we know doesn't work? A definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Assimilation doesn't work. You know what does work? Self-determination. And so, we need to ingrain that into our minds. Still, to this day, when I'm on professional development, or sometimes people just find out that I'm Native, I hear, well, if Native Americans would just blah, blah, blah. If Native Americans would just, move off the reservation. If Native Americans would, again, it's that European colonial mindset. And it's like, you know what, And again, I think it's coming from a good place, but if you look at the history, that doesn't work. And so, again, when people accost me in a store or briefly at a conference, these complex issues, I can't really address them well. I try to give little pieces of education, but yeah, so I usually just kind of wrap it up and say, historically assimilation doesn't work. That sounds like a really good idea because you come from the European colonial perspective. If that was that person, I would just do A, B, and C. Well, we all have our different worldviews, and that's where they're coming from. And so again, that's another reason why we need to learn about American Indian history, to understand their worldview, and to learn about, what hasn't been working, because let's do something that does work. And we do know some things that work, so let's do that. People have heard of historical trauma. I just wanted to touch on, a lot of people don't have a good understanding of it, even if they've heard of it. And I was just in grad school, and one of the students, we started talking about Native American issues. Again, a very well polished, professional, older adult in my class said the same thing that I've been hearing for many, many years. Oh my gosh, that was like 100 years ago. Get over it. It's like, you know what? Number one, that person is not educated. They don't know, because it wasn't just 100 years ago, again, that legacy continues of historical trauma. We still have all sorts of inequities and disparities and different things that go on because of the systems that are in place. And, that's still present today. It wasn't something that happened a long time ago, although we did have a lot of things that happened a long time ago, but that's continued. It's never stopped. But that mentality, again, is out there. Historical trauma is entirely different than consciously holding on to the past. It's intense trauma that actually can change the chemical markers in our genes so that parents pass that along to their children. It affects the DNA. Again, Native Americans are not the only culture or people that are affected by historical trauma. They've done a lot of research on the Holocaust survivors and different women that have experienced famine during their lifetime, that then those traumas were passed on, again, in the markers in our DNA. But again, if you look at the history of American Indians, the prolonged and deep trauma that has continued, it affects us. It affects our tribal communities. It affects the here and the now, and so it's good to understand. I would also like to say that there's a lot of folks that have, and communities that have done a lot of healing. And so, there's a lot of healing that's been taking place. And so, I didn't want to try to skew different things and paint a bleak picture, because there has been a lot of healing, again, going back to that self-determination, taking control of that and being able to repair some of the wrongs that had been had. So not that anybody would forget, but to heal people individually and communities. There are 573 federally recognized tribes. And the thing is that this number changes because different tribes and different nations can apply. There's a very, very long process to get federal recognition, so that number can change. There was a tribe in Virginia, I believe, that recently, in the last 10 years, obtained federal recognition, and it took 30 years process and to go through all of that and then to obtain that federal recognition. So again, those numbers do change. I don't have time to go all over those things. But of those 573 federally recognized tribes, approximately 229 of these ethically and culturally and linguistically diverse nations are located in Alaska. The other federally recognized tribes are located in 35 other states in the United States. And it's good to understand that, again, when we use those terms, Native American, American Indian, or Indigenous, there is no set Native American culture, because we have 573 distinct tribes, and that's just the ones with federal recognitions. There's other tribes that have state recognitions, and then there's other tribes that fought for that recognition and then were not granted, and then different tribes from historically that were really just decimated because of disease and things like that. And so when you think about if asking a student, maybe on campus or different things, it's actually really damaging, number one, to ask one person to stand up and speak on behalf of all Native Americans, because as you can see, there's different cultures, there's different languages and different things across our nation. And I've also heard too, well, on different issues, well, I have a friend that's Native and they don't believe that, or whatever, and I'm like, okay, that's really great, but we don't know their background or how much they've been exposed to their culture or anything. And if I were to ask an American a question about politics and that one person had that opinion, do you think it would be fair then for me to generalize that answer to the whole United States? I mean, of course not. That's silly. But, American Indians are asked to do that all the time, to speak on behalf of all American Indians. And I know that's happened maybe in the classroom or on campus. That's happened to me all the time throughout my youth, teenage, college, and my professional life. And so, I always try to be very careful and say, again, I'm only one person. This is my tribe. This has been my experience. It's very limited. Please don't, generalize this to anybody else, because it's just me, my own personal opinion. Just like all issues on every single topic you could think of, if I asked one person, they'll have their own opinion, but there's no way I can generalize that then to every single American across the United States. But unfortunately, that happens. So I did just want to talk a little bit about having students in classrooms, which I've had many different people just share with me that their experience in classrooms of if the instructor does know that they're American Indian, that they were kind of singled out and had a big spotlight. It's very uncomfortable. Sometimes if, like me, people can get through without maybe being identified as American Indian, sometimes they don't want to because they don't want the spotlight. They don't want to be singled out. They don't want to try to speak on behalf of, the whole culture, even of just the Osheti Shakoi. That isn't appropriate either. And so we just really need to be really careful about doing that. Not only to students, but professionals as well. South Dakota has the most reservations in the whole United States. We have 9. Those 9, again, are a part of the Osheti Shakoi, but there's other tribes not in South Dakota that are a part of that in Montana, North Dakota, Nebraska. But, for today, and we're talking about our South Dakota tribes. But we can't forget that, again, those arbitrary lines that were made up, some really don't have much bearing on the history of the lands. And just because the line was drawn on other tribes were on the other side, they're still encompassed as a whole. But, and I'm going to make sure I got all of those. I'm not going to go all of them, but Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana, and Nebraska all have tribes that are a part of the Osheti Shakoi. And I'm not going to go over, but on other presentations, I had a blank map and made people label them. Boy, that doesn't go over very well. But and I usually have people list them, like, do you know the tribes? Can you list the names? And it doesn't matter if people are from South Dakota or are international or whatever, but people don't do very good on that little quiz. And I don't ask those questions to shame people in any way, but really it's just to reflect that, oh my goodness, we don't know about our own state. We have 9 different tribal communities with rich cultures and values, and we don't know about them. We don't know the names of them. We don't even know where they're at. That's a crime. I mean, that is an injustice to our campus to not include that information, but to not know that about our own state. And again, I'm not saying that to shame anybody. I grew up, of course, on the Lorboro Reservation, but I went to school in Chamberlain, which is a border town, which, if you don't know what that means, that's a town that's located very near a reservation. And Chamberlain was 30 miles away from 2 different ones, Lorboro and Crow Creek. There's people that grew up their whole lives in Chamberlain that's never stepped foot on a reservation, that knows absolutely nothing about that culture, and it's right there. So, proximity doesn't have anything to do with knowledge and acquiring that information. And so, again, going out and seeking that information and making sure that we have a good understanding of that is very important. Tribal sovereignty is something that, again, a lot of people don't know about. A lot of people don't understand, but it's very important that we understand that. And again, I have some distinctions up there because sometimes what tribal folks think of tribal sovereignty, which should be the definition or the intent, is not how the federal government sees that, and that's not really surprising considering the history of the federal government. But for tribes, sovereignty means having the inherent authority to govern themselves within their own borders of the United States. If you look at different definitions, especially for the federal government, tribal sovereignty means that Native American tribes are domestic, dependent nations that exist within the boundaries of the U.S. and that are wards of the U.S. And then in most instances, the federal government does not view tribes as true sovereign and independent nations. And you can really see that in our history because, like I said, tribes have had to go to court for every single right that they have, even though it was spelled out in treaties or in history. That doesn't organically happen. People just kind of shove that to the side. And so because of those lawsuits and different things like that, we've been able to reclaim a lot of like hunting and fishing rights and different things like that were part of the original treaties that the United States was the one that wrote those treaties up. and that was in exchange for land. And so just a little side story about that. And so again, different tribes, there's 573, so they're very vast, but my brother's wife is Nez Perce from Idaho, and then when he moved up there, again, they had to fight for their fishing rights because their main food source traditionally was salmon, and they did have those fishing rights still in their treaties. When they have those rights to fish, whereas other non-native folks don't. Again, these are in their own tribal communities. There's bumper stickers that my brother encountered. This was just a few years ago that says, "Save a salmon, kill an Indian." Again, those things happen, and people don't understand tribal sovereignty. They fish and the salmon to give food, to provide food for elders and their tribal communities, and that's part of that, those treaty rights. And so, that's just an example of ignorance, really, just ignorance. What does tribal sovereignty look like? So tribal governments, again, there's 573 federally recognized tribes. Each of those tribal governments get to have certain rights to govern their own community. They have the power to establish their own form of government and dictate how that runs and what that looks like. They have their own elections and their own court system and all of that, their own leaders and that get to be elected. Each tribe gets to decide how those elections proceed. For my tribe, you have to be an enrolled member living on the reservation in order to vote. Again, my history, I didn't inherently grow up knowing a lot about my own tribal history or native history, but through my life, I've made it a point to learn. But then when I had a sister-in-law that was Nez Perce, I certainly didn't know about other tribes and their backgrounds and different things. And so she taught me a lot about her culture and their tribal community. But in her tribe, as long as you're enrolled, no matter where you live, they get to vote. So she was living in South Dakota, and she got to vote in her tribal elections. And so, she would, when she was also here in South Dakota, so she got and worked for one of our tribes, two actually, and got to learn about our system. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you guys can't vote if you don't live on the reservation." And I was like, that's just the way it's always been. So again, each tribe gets to dictate that for their own community. Again, what does tribal sovereignty look like? The power to determine tribal membership. Again, I'm not going to go over blood quantum and all of that stuff, but each tribe gets to determine based on, again, their criteria, who is in a tribe, who gets to be enrolled, and they have a committee of people, and there's paperwork involved, and they get to make those determinations and to enroll or not enroll certain people who apply. And again, they get to change. As their government proceeds or things change, they get to decide to change those criteria and change those different tribal bylaws. When I became enrolled in the Lower Rural Sioux tribe, my mother was always told us growing up, you are the last generation unless we marry somebody within our tribe who is also a tribal member. We were going to be the last generation that was able to be tribally enrolled. But our tribe changed those criteria, and so they did lower the blood quantum, so then all of my kids got to be enrolled because I did not marry. My kids don't have a father that's enrolled in the Lower Rural Sioux tribe. And again, going back to that tribal membership, historically, again, like if even within South Dakota, within tribes of the Ochechi-Shakowee, if you were enrolled in a Lower Rural Sioux tribe, but you married somebody and had children with somebody, let's say Crow Creek, they're right next to each other, right across the Missouri River, they could not use both of those tribal memberships and those blood quantums. They had to pick one. And so you could have, for example, a full-blooded Lower Rural Sioux, a full-blooded Crow Creek Sioux, but their kids had to pick one, and so those children were only, when they got enrolled, would be half. And so, again, because of tribal sovereignty, there's different tribes that are beginning to change that. But again, some of those, again, being forced to enroll yourself using blood quantum is, that stems back from the colonial European perspective. And, my mom always gets upset, and she's like, the only other thing, we have a ranching background. The only other thing besides, like cattle, horses, and dogs that have to be enrolled or, registered are American Indians. Think about that. Think about that. Going on, what does tribal sovereignty look like? The power to police themselves, adopt our own civil and criminal laws, the power to administer justice, again, in tribal court, tribal jails, the power to exclude people from their reservation. They can do that. The power to regulate research conducted within their community. And again, with tribal sovereignty, that has become a hot topic now, that tribes want to and need to and see the need to control that research. Ogallala Lakota researchers, I'll never forget, I went to a Kirka, the Collaboration for American Indian Health Conference, and they said, nothing about us without us. And that just makes a whole lot of sense, but for years and years and years, and it even happens today, there's a lot of research that goes on about tribal communities or about tribal people that they are not a part of. That's wrong. Again, but with tribal sovereignty, that's beginning to change. The power to tax their citizens or not tax their citizens, that's tribal sovereignty. The power to have control over your schools, to determine who gets hired, who are the people teaching our children, what is that curriculum going to look like? That's tribal sovereignty. And so, again, people don't understand that, but we really need to understand that and then respect that our tribal nations are individual, unique governments that govern themselves. And again, when I grew up, because I was from Lower Brule, like somehow they thought that because Lower Brule and Crow Creek were situated right next to each other, that the governments worked together or did things, and again, just because I was from there, I was like, no, that's not how it works. So I just try to use the examples. I'm like, well, the United States borders Canada, the United States borders Mexico, think about that. And it's the same thing. And so, yeah, understanding tribal sovereignty is very important. Again, before we're almost there to the mist, but before we have one more slide about how American Indians are different from other racial minorities, because we get lumped up with other minorities, and because of some of the things I just talked about, Native Americans are extremely unique. A lot of higher education institutes, this has been, again, something historical that's been happening, maybe in the last, I want to say 10, but I don't even know if it's 10 years, 8, 5. But they have been taking, if they have their American Indian Student Center or different things like that, taking that away from the multicultural umbrella because we don't belong there. We're unique and different, and to try to, again, just group us all together, doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so there's been a push in higher education and we did at SDSU, we're no longer under the, and it wasn't a bad thing, but again, it's just more of, again, that sovereignty with indigenous folks being in higher education saying, this isn't really right. Because, again, it wasn't the decision of Native folks to do that, it was other folks. And so when you look at the history and look at the sovereignty and look at all those things, it's very clear that American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians were all member of the original indigenous tribes of these lands, and we have very unique legal and political relationships with the federal government, like this gentleman over here said, that we have government to government political relationships. No other minority has that. Makes us unique. And again, because of those political relationships, the U.S. does provide services based on that political government-to-government relationship, not because of the political race or ethnicity, but because it goes back to those treaties. And so tribal members are citizens of 3 sovereigns: their tribe, the state in which they reside, and the U.S. There is no other ethnic or racial entity that has that. That makes us unique. And again, a lot of people don't know that, but I bet you people living in tribal communities sure know that. And I was actually just at Pine Ridge not so long ago, and you know, the gal that was talking, she was like, "We don't live on reservations. We live on tribal nations." You know, and so she didn't really like that term reservation, but you know, she was very empowered with her tribal sovereignty and talked about how her mother empowered her with that, and she's been empowering her children. And you know, I'm kind of jealous of that because that was not the experience that I had. My grandpa, because he witnessed the government taking lands away in the Allotment Act, where they sold off their own reservation lands to white settlers, and how the climate was, he was convinced that maybe not in his generation, but for sure in his children's generation, that there would be no such thing as reservations. He thought eventually they would take it all away. And so my family's mindset was, we need to assimilate, because we're not going to have our tribal lands anymore. We're not going to have this. And so it was a little bit of a desperation there. So again, you know, different backgrounds, different perspectives have different things that happen in their family. Myth. Native Americans do not get a check from the government just for being Native American. So please, if you hear that, please disarm that myth. Doesn't happen, never has. You know, there's a lot of reasons why maybe that was perpetuated, but you know, way in history. Now, I will say that each tribal community has different social services, so individuals that can get on TANF or GA, which stands for General Assistance, which is again like Brookings County Social Services. When they get TANF and the GA, that's usually comparable, the same amount of money in the same circumstance or criteria. If tribes have resources like minerals or timber or you know something like that they get revenue for their natural resources, they can then share that revenue with their tribal members. That does not come from the government. That comes from revenue. Just like if I had land and they found oil on my land, if I let somebody mine that, I would get money. Different tribes have different resources. You know, in South Dakota, we don't have a lot of natural resources. Also, there's IAM accounts, again, that if there was some sort of legal thing or some, usually it goes back to some legal instances where there was a lawsuit that possibly the tribe won, and then they were allowed to have, like, they won a settlement. There's accounts that if you're a minor that would go into. I mean, you know, back in the day, even those monies, even adults weren't allowed to control those. But those still exist. But anyway, so there are means where people could get some money, but it's not just a check from the government for being Native American. And then a lot of the times, if they do have some sort of resources they give to tribal members, and again, each tribe gets to decide this, but you have to be an enrolled member living on the reservation to have that, or to be included in that. And so I know Flandreau does have they have a casino. It is, again, that's another myth that isn't on my list, but they're the only casino in the South Dakota that has enough profits to give some to their tribal members. They have to be tribally enrolled and live in Moody County, because Flandreau Santee tribe does not have boundaries, so they use the boundaries of Moody County. So if you're enrolled and you don't live on Moody County, you don't get in on that. So yes, but that is a myth. Another myth, that TCUs, or tribal colleges and universities, are not real colleges. I did go to a tribal college. I graduated from SDSU and we moved to McLaughlin, and I was a teacher, but I wanted to get my special education endorsement, and so Sitting Bull College was very near there. So I went just for a year, took 2 classes a semester. I had the best experience at Sitting Bull College, and I can attest firsthand. Again, all tribal colleges are different, but was very beneficial, very valuable education, and the thing I appreciated most was like a lot of my instructors who were master's level professionals still working in the field, and they had that firsthand experience, that firsthand knowledge that they were able to share in their classroom. It was so valuable to me. And nothing against any professors that didn't have that, but then I finished up at Northern, and I would kind of get in debates with this one of my professors because she just went from her undergrad to her master's to her PhD to teaching, and she had very limited firsthand experience. And we would be teaching about something or some concept, and I would always say, okay, that's okay in theory, but that is not the realities when you get into the field. And then we would have these debates. Who has heard this? If you're Native, you go to college for free. Again, that was another thing that when I was in college here, people found out I was Native. Oh, you're so lucky. You get to go to college for free. I was like, what? Again, I didn't know about these myths. I didn't know that these perpetuated, and then I didn't know that was a thing, like all through the United States. That is not true. And would have been great for me to have more support in college, but I had student loans that I just got through paying off not so long ago. But Native Americans have to pay tuition, apply and qualify for financial aid and scholarships just like any other student. Again, 573 different tribes, but specific tribes do have scholarships for their tribally enrolled members. Again, but you have to apply. They have limited funds. They have criteria as far as like GPA and different things like that. And then every year you have to submit your grades and your transcripts and things like that. And if you don't do that, you don't get the scholarship, and that's a scholarship. I did get a scholarship from my tribe when I went to college. I got $250 a semester. I'm not going to say that I didn't appreciate that, but that wasn't enough to buy my books some semester. A far cry from being free. There are different colleges. Morris, Minnesota has tuition free for Native Americans, as does Fort Lewis College. But that again is based on history, where the infrastructure and those schools used to be BIA-run boarding schools, government-run boarding schools. And so when they eradicated the boarding schools, again, those lands and those buildings that were set aside for Native Americans then were gifted to develop colleges. And so part of those treaties were that, okay, so now we're once again taking things away from Native Americans. So now, because of that, so the deal was Native Americans got to go to college, they're tuition free, but they still have to pay fees and books and food and residential. So but they do get a break on tuition. Now there's a lot of states that have been moving forward. Montana is one of them, where they do allow Native Americans enrolled in that state or descendant from that state to go to college. They're again tuition free. Those are new phenomenons that we can't do that here in South Dakota, but again, that's a myth. Again, there's different scholarships for minorities, like a lot of people have heard the Gates. That is for minorities. Those funds are limited. They take the very top students. They're highly competitive, but there are some good scholarships out there. But yeah, do Native Americans go to college for free? No, that's a myth. American Indians have distinguishing physical characteristics, and you can identify them by how they look. Again, working with professionals, I've heard something like, there was a Native American in my class, so this happened. Or, oh, I said this and I offended somebody. Well, I didn't know there was anybody Native American in my class. And it's like, well, how would anybody know? Due to tribal diversity, hundreds of years of intertribal and interracial relationships, there is no distinguishing look. There's some tribes that have a lot of blonde hair, blue-eyed folks in their tribe. And again, I am an enrolled member. I grew up on the reservation. I was raised by a single mother who is Native, but I was called the whitey of the family. I take no offense to that. I still get called that. But my siblings have brown hair. My sister has brown eyes, a lot darker complected, where phenotypically they look more Native. I don't. And because of that, I've had a lot of people say disparaging things or very offensive things in front of me, and I'm talking about professors, doctors, nurses in my life, because they don't know I'm Native American. And so I'm like, you know what? You need to be who you are, be respectful, be able to address certain issues in your class or on campus or in your work, irregardless of if there's a Native American present. And so, you're really never going to tell. All American Indians know about their tribe's history, religion, and practice their culture. Trying to put people on the spot about answering questions about Native American history or Native American culture, you don't know how that person was raised. You don't know the level of assimilation or the level of involvement in those traditional things, and making assumptions, just is never really a good idea. But again, going back to like possibly working with American Indian students, trying to put people on the spot, which I have been a lot of time, it's embarrassing, especially for people. And even if a person was raised that way and has that knowledge, it's really not fair to them to try to be like the spokesperson for that knowledge or the person who's sharing that knowledge. A lot of times, and that's okay if people want to do that, but a lot of times they're just trying to be a kid or they're just trying to be a student, and so putting them on the spot like that is unfair. Natalie is going to come to talk about the tribal colleges and universities.
Before presenting, thank you, Nicole and Shanna, for allowing me to present today on this topic that's near and dear to my heart. So hopefully I'll share a little bit about TCUs and American Indian students. First tribal college, Dine College of the Navajo Nation in 1969. The second one from South Dakota, St. Gleska in 1970. So the purpose for tribal colleges is to increase access to higher education for youth and community members growing up and around the reservations. TCUs have a dual education philosophy that combines Native American culture, history, and language within all courses of study, yet addresses Western models of learning by providing traditional disciplinary courses that are transferable to four-year institutions. TCUs are located in rural areas on or around the reservation so they can better serve their communities. And the most favorite part of being part of a TCU is the family-like atmosphere that we have between our students, faculty, and staff. TCUs, according to AHAC, American Indian Higher Education Consortium, there are currently 38 TCUs in the U.S., representing 1/2 of the 573 tribes. In South Dakota, there's one that sits on the border of South Dakota and North Dakota, but do serve in South Dakota. There's OLC. They have a campus in Kyle and 11 college centers, one in each of the 9 districts, Eagle Butte and Rapid City. St. Gleska in Mission with Laura Brule Community College in Laura Brule, Ahongtuan in Yankton, offering degrees up to a master's, as well as OLC. Sitting Bull in Fort Yates, North Dakota, with sites in McLaughlin and Mobridge offering degrees up to a master's, and Sisseton Wahpeton College in Sisseton offering associate degrees. Land grant status. So originally, the Land Grant Act of 1862 and 1890 helped establish higher institutions dedicated to teaching ag and the mechanic arts. Now the mission of the land grant institutions includes science, nutrition, leadership, youth activities, and other areas. Acknowledging that TCUs played a similar role within the tribal communities because of their ties to tribal lands and their economic development, Congress added them in 1994. At that time, there was 29 tribal colleges, and now there are a total of 38, known as the 1994 Land Grant Institutions. Just a few ways TCUs are unique. They strengthen their tribal nations. They have long-term impacts on their students. They sustain Native culture, history, and language that is viable for sustaining the people of these nations, working in the community and starting businesses within the community to support their families and their local tribal economy. TCUs and tribal nations are not homogeneous. Their differences are based on leadership, community members and dynamics, and the students they serve. So I thought it would be interesting to examine the 4 TCUs that serve in South Dakota and their missions. So OLC's mission, Rebuilding the Lakota Nation Through Education. St. Gleska University provides a model for Indian-controlled education. It is an institution governed by people rooted to the reservation and culture, concerned about the future and willing to work to the institution's grow. It provides each Lakota person the opportunity to pursue an education and does so in a way that's relevant to career and personal needs. St. Gleska University graduates will help determine the future development and direction of the tribe and its institution. The mission of St. Gleska University is to plan, design, implement, and assess post-secondary programs and other educational resources uniquely appropriate to the Lakota people in order to facilitate individual development and tribal autonomy. SBCs is guided by Lakota Dakota culture, value, and language. Sitting Bull College is committed to building intellectual capital through academic, career, and technical education and promoting economic and social development. SWCs to provide higher education, research, vocational and technical, and continuing education to the members of the Sisseton-Waupun Oyate of the Lake Traversey Reservation and others within the historical lands of the Sisseton-Waupun Oyate. TCUs make a concerted effort to hire and retain Native American faculty and staff. Throughout my years, to provide role models to their students, throughout my years, my mom went to boarding school at age 2, never raised on the reservation, so I was not exposed to the culture. Very embarrassed of it, in fact. There was a lot of times that people would say very racial comments in the elementary. I grew up in Fort Pierre, and so I didn't look Native, so I didn't, self-identify. And it wasn't actually until 7 years ago that I went to the college that I really became in love and really learned the culture more. I still don't know it all, but really feel more grounded and a whole person just because of learning what I have. So it's a great to have role models, that for our students to see what they can become and their goals and dreams can happen. What makes TCUs unique? Other unique components are the student services offered at TCUs are imperative for our students. They could be daycare, nutrition, counseling, transportation. At LBCC, we serve meals, usually for the first couple weeks, and I'm the cook. For the first couple weeks of classes, we serve meals every night. We offer book clubs, women's health education, and transportation to events, registration, and all the classes each night. TCUs support Native American entrepreneurship by offering business courses. We have one going on right now that is helping our students create business plans, leadership development workshops, technical assistance at their business centers. So over the last 7 years, I knew I wanted to make a difference someday, and hopefully I don't start crying. It's been an emotional week, but I've heard just so many countless stories of how we're their cheerleaders, how we're the only support system that they've ever had in their life, and that LBCC is their refuge, it's their positive place, that even if they don't have classes, they come there just to be around positive energy. And there's so many times one-on-one that I've talked to students that they say that they would have ended their life if it wouldn't have been for the college. So, what do you say to that? It's hard to leave that. Working with TCUs, faculty and students, most importantly, it's about relationship building. Don't make assumptions. A lot of students have said that they might be in a crowd and they are the only Native looking person, and so people assume they know everything about their culture, their history, their language, but everyone was raised differently. And so ask questions, learn about each of them, learn about their culture. Follow the 7 Lakota Values: prayer, respect, caring, compassion, honesty, generosity, humility, and wisdom. So what amazing world we would live in if we all practiced these values each and every day. But it's a good starting place. We've done this at the college, that we practice one value for each week or each month, so it's a good practice. Cultural differences to understand and respect. So as shared earlier, there's 573 federally recognized tribes, and each of them have a diverse group of individuals. So, some are very traditional, some are assimilated into mainstream America, and then there's those in between. And so even at our little college, we have so many faculty and staff that have differing levels, and we learn so much from each other. And I was actually meeting with a teacher last week, and he was in my office, and we were talking about something. He's a math teacher, so he drew a 6 on a sticky, the 6 that faced his way, but then my way, it was a 9. And he's like, both of us are right, but it's just our perspective. So, widening our perspective of other cultures and other mindsets, it just makes us better people. So exercise the 5 R's. So respect the relationship, and know that the instructor is not the one that's all-knowing. I know when I've taught that I learned so much more than what I feel like I teach. Relevance, appreciation of spiritual relationships, reciprocity. Teaching and learning is a two-way process. Responsibility. Universities need to celebrate and support minority students' history and examine how their lives have been shaped by society. And relationships. Get to know your students, mentor them, attend cultural events, and visit their centers. That's so very important. Learning styles of American Indians. So according to the National Center for Educational Statistics 2016, American Indians generally demonstrated lower achievement scores. And we all know that, so oftentimes they come to college already behind. Based on several studies I researched in my own observation as an instructor, American Indian students are often visual learners, excel in cooperative environments, and are very reflective learners. In contrast, it's believed that white middle-class learners are typically value and develop refined verbal skills, value competition, and excel independently, perceive analytically, and are impulsive learners. So by viewing that, we know that American Indian students' learning styles differ very, significantly over the typical U.S. classroom. They don't like to be in the spotlight. I hate this. Do best in small settings and more observers that practice in private. So, just really what I did when I still teach once in a while, but I did a lot of icebreakers at first and really, getting them comfortable, because we'd go over the syllabus and then they'd freak out when they saw a presentation, just like I did when I was a student, and they're like, oh my gosh. So just little baby steps, incorporating, more speaking on their own and learning, about their peers. And so they just, by the end of the semester, they are very comfortable speaking. Beneficial techniques: using multicultural curriculum, using diverse teaching instruction. And I did this, I taught a lot in the summer. We do 1 week classes, and so it was like 8 hours a day. And so we broke it all up. They'd read for a short period of time, and we'd go over the PowerPoints, and then they would do group interaction, and then we'd do a 5-minute break. And it seemed like, everything was always moving, and they did very well in that, and they really enjoyed that. Use personal reference, telling your story. What better way to relationship build is having them get to know you, and not just your accomplishments, but your struggles. There were so many times that I would tell in my classes things that I never told anyone, and I'm like, don't you, tell anybody what goes around in this classroom. So just, really creating environment that really caring and wanting to know about them. Give students choices in how and what they learn. Everybody learns differently, and I have terrible test anxiety, and a lot of students do, so I would throw in an extra test, and they could all choose to take all 4 tests or 5 tests and throw one out, or they could just not come to one of the exams, and it just relieved a lot of stress and created a lot of flexibility and a positive environment. Connect academic concepts to real life. I had a student that was in my business class, and she really had a hard time with the concept organization. She couldn't understand it. So privately, she came to me and said that, and to me, it was like, how do you not know that? But so I was just trying to figure out how I could relay it in simpler terms. So I said, well, how about a family? A family is like an organization. There's someone that's usually in charge. And so we just broke it down, and then her eyes lit up, and it was like, yeah, she understood. So just really spending the time and knowing your students and what they're struggling. Active learning, sharing in small groups, and so that they're more comfortable with their peers. I was listening to an Audible book over the weekend, and this really resonated with me. It was a quote by Dale Carnegie. Education is not about knowledge, it's about action. So as educators, we must change our views. It's not about lectures and tests anymore. That's the old way. We must serve our students with a mindset to get to know them. Education is constantly evolving, and we need to build those relationships. And will it be easy? No, it won't, but it will be very rewarding. Thank you. Hey.
I know we're going over a little bit of time here, so I'm going to go over these quickly, and I do want everyone to know that we do have a Wokini website, and this information isn't up yet. We did spend a lot of time this summer. We came up with a 5-year plan and goals and objectives that will all be on the website that you can review. But since President Dunn's inauguration, we've done so many things across campus and have already accomplished a number of different things and started different initiatives here. The American Indian Student Center is going to break ground this fall. We have awarded 15 Wokini scholarships to incoming freshmen, and those are $5,000 a year for 5 years. Our own enrollment of self-identifying American Indian freshman students has jumped from 10 last fall to nearly 30 this fall. We've hired a Native American student recruiter. Her name is Amber Marceau, and she is amazing. She's working full-time with the schools across the state, our TCUs, and she's also going to be developing a summer program for middle school and high school students. Her and April have developed a new, they called it Traveling NSO, which is our new student orientation, but they renamed it, Amber did. It's called SDSU to You, where they're taking our new student orientation out to tribal communities and, allowing to be in those communities to address that issue of coming here to our campus. And so it's been successful already. We've awarded 6 internal Wokini Challenge grants to staff and faculty here to assist with their efforts in recruiting and supporting American Indian students, and also to enhance our partnerships with tribal communities, which is a big part of the Wokini Initiative. We've developed, again, a 5-year plan with lofty goals and lots of action plans, lots of visits to our tribal communities and TCUs, working with potential donors to secure additional support for our student scholarships, because those need to be fundraised. And so we're going to continue to grow our American Indian students, continue to grow our scholarships, and so we need to really get in there and do a lot of fundraising for those endeavors. But everybody across this campus knows about fundraising. We've also offered 14 Wokini scholarships to graduates of TCUs in South Dakota who have their associate's degree from a TCU and want to come to SDSU for a 4-year degree. Also TCU students who have graduated with a 4-year degree at the TCU who would like to come here for a master's degree. So we have scholarships for them as well. And then President Dunn has also been working very closely with congressional delegation regarding the Farm Bill and putting language in there as far as matching grants for those land-grant colleges that use their funds to support American Indian students. So we're hoping that passes, and so that would bring some additional funding here for our American Indian student and the Wokini Initiative. Again, going around and presenting what the Wokini Initiative is to many audiences. The Wokini Initiative, it's not just a department, it's this umbrella that covers all of our campus. And so Wokini, again, means new beginning in Lakota. It's not just a new beginning for our Native students or our tribal communities, it's a new beginning for all of us, all of our campus communities, all of our departments, where we need to be focused and really include that Native American student, our tribal communities, that perspective, and to be thinking about that on a conscious level. How can we be Wokini? And so, I challenge all of you to, again, this is not something, this initiative is great, and it's being viewed across the nation, but, we've been leaving out our American Indian students and our tribal communities. Like I said, a lot of people can't even name them. And so, it's a great initiative that's long overdue. But again, we need to make a concerted effort to do that and, stop our tunnel vision and widen our horizons. And, I'm here to help. But I cannot accomplish the goals and the missions of the Wokini Initiative or all of our goals and objectives alone, and that's not the intent, because it's a campus initiative. I will lead the initiative. I will help facilitate things. I have great ideas and partnerships already that have started, but this is a team effort, and it's not going to be successful unless everybody does their due diligence. And like I said, if you need help in any of those endeavors, I'm here to help you. If you have ideas, I would love to hear them, because I've had a lot of conversations about different peoples with their different ideas regarding research and outreach and recruitment efforts, retention programs, and different things like that. And so, the initiative has to encompass a lot of different things, because this is a very complex historical situation we have with what's going on with Indian education or tribal communities. There's no one quick answer. There's no quick and dirty, we can just do this and it's all going to be good. It doesn't work that way, And so it is going to take thinking out of the box. Again, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And so we can't do the same thing. And we can't do the same thing and just tweak it a little, We have to think differently. We have to think broadly. We have to have some education about our American Indian history and culture and see how we can use that in our classrooms across campus. And the mission statement is, Wokini at SDSU provides innovative university and community-wide collaboration to strengthen American Indian student success by building authentic partnerships with tribal communities. Those relationships with our tribal communities are so vital. Again, I just go back to what the Ogallala research folks said, nothing about us without us. And it seems like such a simple concept, but we need to work together. We need to work smarter and not harder. And so I thank everybody for being here today.